Thank you for attending today's chat regarding the United States Performance Pulse, as well as the benchmarking metrics that RetailNext has been publishing over the last couple years. So today for my session, I'm going to go through some of the historical trends that we've been monitoring over the course of the last 6 years, as well as doing some deep dives into some of the more recent holiday time periods for both the United States, and then expanding that into some of the metrics that we've also been publishing for the United Kingdom, as well as some of the European countries, and then also start to launch some of the new metrics that we're going to start to publish within the next few months with our Canadian retailers. So to just jump right into some of the metrics, I want to start out by showcasing some long-term trends of what we've been seeing within the United States, basically going back to the COVID closures of 2020. So we've got the last 6 years of data all on this chart, and we can really kind of break it out into the last 3 years compared to the 3 years prior. So the 3 years prior, we really saw large declines in that 2020 year with all of the closures. And the next 2 years were really spent kind of in a recovery period, right? 2021 with a plus 15, 2022 with a plus 10, kind of getting us not all the way back, but much more closely to what we were seeing from a traffic trend standpoint prior to 2020. Now, the last few years, 3 years in particular, 2023, 2024, and 2025, we've really seen a lot more stabilization in the traffic trends across the United States. So if we look at those numbers, we see kind of actually a nice escalating number of about -1 in 2023, -2 in 2024, and then -3 so far, or after just completed through the 2025 trends. Now, we'll get into some deep dives in particular over the last 3 years where we can see how traffic and sales have also been performing in combination with each other. So the first 2 years, 2023 and 2024, that we're highlighting here, really showed that those sales trends were slightly underperforming what we're seeing from a traffic standpoint. So traffic in general was still down -1 to -2, but at the same time, our sales metrics for physical stores was trending at a -3. So that conversion, that ATV was up, but that conversion as well as the UPT was contributing to that decline that we've seen over time from the sales, especially in 2023 and 2024. Within 2025, in all of the considerations regarding tariffs and some of the changes that have been happening throughout the year, we've started to see actually traffic decline by larger than sales. And some of that, which we'll get into specifically, has to do with a lot of the increases in the average unit retail of the average item that is being purchased, with some reductions in some cases of the number of units that have been sold over that time as well. So just to hone in a little bit more on that 2025 time period, and especially kind of breaking it out with the holiday trends, is there was a lot of questions too this year with Christmas falling on the Thursday for the first time in 7 or 8 years, how that was going to impact our trends for traffic and sales. And what we can really see actually is that non-holiday traffic in particular was outpacing what we saw over the holiday time period. So I've kind of broken it out from the November time period up until the last week, which included Christmas. And we can see that traffic trend over that holiday shopping period was down about 5%, outpacing what we saw throughout the rest of the year when traffic was only down about 2.5%. Sales trends, similar to what I'd mentioned before, have been consistently outpacing the market from a traffic standpoint, with sales outside of the holiday time period being down about 1.5% and sales in the holiday time period being about 2.2%. So there has been a little bit more of a consolidation of customers as they actually go into the store, not always converting more, but spending more, and that's driving some of that not positive increase in sales, but outperforming what we're seeing from a traffic declining standpoint over the course of 2025 in particular. To dive in a little bit more around some of what's actually driving those sales trends that we're seeing, I just wanted to showcase this to start off, like showing what we've seen from an ATV standpoint going back about 3 years. So average transaction value consistently has been up about 1% year over year from 2023 to 2022, and then 24 to 23, and then 25 to 24. We've actually started to see that go up to close to 2%. And in particular, we see the ATV, which is that blue bar, it was kind of stagnating or kind of around 0%, especially in the middle of the year, but especially the second half of the year as we get into some of maybe the tariff costs being pushed down more to consumers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. but we've really started to see that ATV increase significantly over that second half of the year, and in particular over the holiday period as well. So the next view will showcase that in particular, where the first half of 2025, average transaction value was up about 0.5%, conversion was up about 0.2%. What we've seen from the second half is a little bit of a reversal, at least from a conversion standpoint, in that people aren't converting as often when they were coming into the stores in 2025, second half of 2025, but that ATV, largely driven by that increase in the average unit retail, was up pretty significantly by about 3%. And in particular, you can really see that over that holiday shopping time period from November to December in particular. A little bit of a deep dive then into what actually makes up our average transaction values, in particular of that units per transaction and that average unit retail. So it has been a consistent theme over the last 3 years that the average unit cost is going up compared to the prior year, versus that's also been leading to maybe a trade down in the number of units that are being purchased. So we've seen consistently as well that average unit total down by about 1%, with that average unit retail up by about 2 to 2.5%. Now, in 2025 in particular was a little bit interesting, where we saw that UPT number, which is the blue, was up a little bit more towards the first half of 2025. And then as that average unit retail number has increased in the second half of 2025, that's really where we've started to see that UPT decrease by even more. So this chart in particular showcases that when you're talking about the second half of 2025 versus that first half of 2025. And just from some research around the macroeconomic factors, Goldman Sachs basically said that they expected by the end of 2025 that consumers would start to bear the burden of about 55% of the tariff costs, compared to it was about 30 to 35% up through halfway through the year. And I think we've seen that in some of the numbers as well from an average unit retail standpoint, up about 4% compared to the same time in 2024, and with that same unit kind of going down by about 1%. So a lot of that really showcasing itself in particular in that second half versus that first half. Maybe there's still a little more uncertainty around the tariff impact and what's that going to do from a sales standpoint. Maybe some people starting to front load some of their purchases in the first half of the year before those tariff impacts start to impact retailers in the pricing. And that's really where we've started to see the big changes towards the second half of 2025. I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the holiday trends, because this was a bit of a unique year compared to the last 7 or 8 years of data that we had, with Christmas falling on a Thursday compared to it being earlier in the week last year. So when we just look at the holiday traffic percent change by day, what was really interesting for me kind of monitoring this over the holiday time period, and this is just looking at each individual day generally compared to its corresponding day in 2024 with some minor adjustments. But what I think was really surprising during that December week 3, which the final day of December week 3 is Super Saturday, we really saw significant declines year over year, about 9% overall, but a lot of it being driven even by, the Sunday of that week. And then that whole week was pretty significantly down by about 10%. And that Super Saturday and then the Sunday after started to increase a little bit more. But what we think from this is that extra day of shopping in particular didn't really have that incentive to get into the stores earlier. And it actually, while they didn't delay shopping because we didn't quite ever see the increase, which I'll get into in the next slide, but we didn't see that impetus to really drive customers into stores earlier on. And because of that, we saw that December week 3 with Super Saturday being down actually our most declines of the entire holiday time period of 2025. When we get into December week 4, which does include Christmas, we did start to see some improving trends, down by only about -3%. But what I find really interesting is actually the increases that we see after Christmas. So we look at, Boxing Day, 12/27 as well, which is a Saturday. We actually start to see traffic start to increment up a little bit more. So, potentially that post-holiday shopping maybe returns up a little bit more. We saw more consumers going to stores. Even though still declining, we still see, even within the new year and how the new year fell, we saw some pretty dramatic increases even in traffic, in particular around that New Year's Eve, that New Year's Day as well, with more people going to stores in particular that we saw over the last couple of years. And then just the final point around that was just looking at the holiday traffic percentage over the last 2 years. So 2024 to 2025, when were customers shopping? So this at the bottom is kind of the 56-day period that we consider the holiday shopping period of November week 1 through December week 4. So over time, we did see in 2024, there was more shopping being done in that last week leading up to Christmas. So about 22%, 21% of holiday traffic in that last week compared to only about 20% in 2025. So more shopping later last year, potentially due to that one fewer day between Super Saturday and Christmas. And we did see in 2025, in particular, earlier on, we saw more holiday shopping being done earlier in November in 2025 compared to what we saw in 2024. And then it just never really increased again in 2025 at that point. So saw some declines there. There was just a little bit of that difference with that extra day, not really driving customers for that kind of mass shopping day that we saw last year. And that's where we saw some of those declines over time. So with that, I'm going to do a quick dive into some of the regions and categories over time as well. There'll be less of a holiday focus on this, but just looking at kind of overall 2025 throughout. And I've also got the trends of 2023 and 2024 as well. But in this case, what we can really see is that over 2025, the kind of standout performers in our numbers have been apparel and jewelry, which are still declining, but only declining by about 1.5% to 2% year over year. And those were also some of our top performing retailer categories within 2024 as well. What's interesting now is since COVID in 2020, we've been seeing significant declines in the home category, in particular in 2023 and 2024. But over 2025, we started to see that come down a little bit more. So it's been about 6 years from COVID, people starting to maybe go back into the home, make some more home traffic purchases as well. And that home category started to come down a little bit more. What's interesting too is that the footwear category, which in the past had been a fairly strong performing category, is now actually our largest decline traffic year over year at about 6%. When we look at it on a regional level as well, we're starting to actually see a little bit less convergence. Last year, we had pretty consistent trends across the different regions. Northeast down about 2% last year compared to the West down about 3.1%. What we've seen this year is a little bit of a widening of that spread. So the West now down close to 4% in 2025 versus the Midwest and the Northeast only down about 2%. So we've seen some of those different trends over time, and we especially saw over the holiday time period, in particular with this blue line, which I'll call your attention to of November week 3 and November week 4. We saw some really dramatic declines in the Midwest because of some severe snowstorms, which had a major impact on not Black Friday itself, but the Saturday after Black Friday, which the Midwest without that would potentially even be only down about 1% because it really took almost like 40-50% declines on that Saturday after Black Friday because of the snowstorms that hit just after Black Friday. With that, kind of the deep dive to the US, what I want to do is just showcase some of the trends that we've also had within the UK. The UK details will also be included in our Performance Pulse dashboard, which is a part of the UI. All of the US trends that I went through are also included in the dashboard that's readily available for anybody to access at any time. So with the UK, we've looked at the similar trends of non-holiday versus holiday time period, and it did kind of match up with what we saw in the United States as well, with that non-holiday traffic down about 2.5% and that holiday traffic trending more towards the -4. So a little bit more kind of some of the studies and some of the consumer sentiment studies, not in the UK, but in the US, did show that people were expecting to purchase less this year, expecting to do more online shopping as well. And we think that, in the US, that also potentially applies to what we've seen in the UK with just some of the economic uncertainty, maybe driving some of those less shopping visits that we saw over the holiday time period in particular. Just a quick dive into some of the categories that we do make available within the United Kingdom as well. Over the course of 2025, the telecom electronics category was the one that was kind of bringing up the most of the declines in there, down about 4% year over year, whereas apparel and footwear has been pretty consistent in about -1.5% over the course of the year, and then jewelry being kind of our top performing overall category within the UK, down only about 1% year over year as well. When we kind of expand this out a little bit more into the rest of kind of continental Europe, we can see somewhat similar trends in at least a few of those brands. So we look at France in particular, which has trended for the year at kind of about -3.5%. We've seen the non-holiday period time also kind of boosting that up at -3.2. But then that holiday shopping in particular, that last week, so December week 3, which contains Super Saturday, large significant declines, like the second or third largest declines in traffic over that December week 3 time period for the holiday shopping period, in particular in France. We also see these similar trends in Spain as well, where we saw larger declines over the holiday shopping time period compared to the non-holiday shopping time period. And again, that December week 3, with that one extra day for shopping for Christmas, tended to have a pretty dramatic impact on the number of people going into shop during that third week of December, as well as that Super Saturday, where we saw generally, 5-6% point declines in traffic on that Super Saturday, that last Saturday before Christmas. And then finally, Germany as well, where we're also starting to see a little bit of a difference with the last two. So Germany and Italy did show a little bit of a different kind of trend line for the holiday time period, where we actually started to see more shopping in Germany and Italy, where it was outpacing the rest of the year. In particular in Germany, where you don't often, or we don't even see that kind of large blip in the decline in Germany. Germany was a little more stable at about 3.5%, significantly better than the overall year to date and the non-holiday time period. And then Italy as well, where not quite as much of a difference between the non-holiday and the holiday shopping time periods, but still a little bit more of an overperformance compared to the rest of the year over the holiday time period compared to the non-holiday time period. And then finally, I wanted to showcase some of the new metrics that we plan to be publishing within the next few months. So we've started to develop our analytics in the Canadian region. So just to showcase what we've seen in Canada, uh, very similar to the US actually. And the next chart will kind of show those too. So overall, we did see that non-holiday shopping period in Canada down about 2%. The holiday shopping period down about 4%. But the trends weekly, even though overall in the aggregate, very similar, the weekly trends are actually fairly different across Canada and the US, even though in the end it's kind of netted out. So Canada really much larger declines earlier on in the year. And then we're seeing a lot of positive trends, especially in the middle of the year, summer, June, July time period, when the US was still in that negative 3 to 5% territory. Canada was actually seeing some increases in its traffic over time as well. And then when we get into, again, kind of focusing on that holiday time period, outside of that Christmas shopping period, we saw those trends being very similar. That December week 3 comment, especially around Super Saturday and that extra day in between Super Saturday and Christmas, really impacting that December week 3 with, negative 10% declines in both the US and Canada on Super Saturday. But then again, going back to after that, the Christmas pass, we started to see people going back to the stores again, increasing compared to what we saw last year. And it was really driving a lot more traffic over that New Year's and that New Year's Eve holiday time period. Just the final point to kind of make around Canada is that, Canada, we're still developing the metrics. We plan to be publishing these within the next few months. We will be trying to publish some categories as well, but at least providing some top line numbers for our Canadian retailers so that there can be some benchmarking there. And also just starting to monitor how it's doing in comparison to what the US is doing, how much in sync are the two markets versus where are we seeing some of those differences between how the US is performing and how Canada is performing. And with that, that's all the data I have for today. Please let me know if you have any questions or any other follow-ups. I'm happy to take them offline. Thank you.